processes, you're educating your staff on, risk mitigation. Fluffy Bunny 1234, believe it or not, is not a good password.
Getting that flexibility between convenience and security, right? It's always a balance act. It's like, do you make it so complicated and so secure that it's impossible to get work done?
And there's softwares that can crack these things. But, at the end of the day, process, policies, making sure your staff are in tune with that, and then making sure that you have a risk mitigation and a process when risk does occur, I think is Hey everybody, welcome to the Challengtunity podcast. I'm Chris Lawson, and we got a very exciting episode for you today. We're going to be diving way more technical than I think we've ever been able to do. Joined today by my co-host, Jordan Wolf, who, ironically, the only thing he hates more than lying is skim milk, but he thinks skim milk is just water lying about being milk. So, Jordan, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. I mean, it's a fitting day to talk about IT and technical sophistication because now we got these fancy animated elements that come to the podcast.
Yes. I made those myself. I'm very proud. I made sure all of our staff at the office saw them. They all gave me the stamp of approval. So very proud of myself. So I mentioned that we're having probably the most technical episode that we've ever had. The reality is that we're always very technical, but I think we're actually going to be talking more about tech stack today, aren't we, Jordan?
I think so. I mean, I'm going to go when I say the word
I
IT.
know. I hate
that's how
IT
I feel about it.
until it's a problem.
I think that's how a lot of people approach it. But it is important. It's all around us. It's what has kind of lubricated the world of technology and modern business these days. So it is there. It is in the ether. It is in between everything, and it is the universe. So we can kind of talk about that hidden world, the things that make us get through the day without disconnecting, or maybe we do have the occasional Zoom call that goes awry, but those are few and far between these days. So.
Well, I think it's important to say that, we talk about tech stack, maybe you're in the G Suite, or you're in the Microsoft world and everyone's on Teams or, whatever. But the reality is, like, even in our personal life, there's a certain level of, tech that we utilize and we don't even really realize it, whether it be your email that you have on your phone or whatever. All of these things that we use in our day-to-day, in our business or personal life, are frankly all things that are there to streamline process, make things a little bit easier for us. I mean, a long time ago, we'd have to send faxes and actually communicate with words and things like that. Technology has kind of helped us get around those things and be a little bit more efficient.
Unless you're the government, apparently they still operate in faxes, but we'll,
yes.
I guess, get there sometime by 99 or something like that.
Well, I wanted to kind of start today with our first segment, just talking about IT in the workplace. And we all have nightmare stories. We've all been there. And if you haven't, you've taken a ticket and your number will be drawn at one point. But the reality is, IT in the workplace is something that should be proactive and not reactive. If you're being reactive to an issue or a problem, it's usually too late at that point. So when you're being proactive, just like in marketing or in any kind of business modeling, you have to have a strategy associated with it. So what are the requirements that you were, of your tech stack, of the processes that you have in place? Do you have risk mitigation policies? These are all things that kind of come along the world of IT.
Yeah, I think it's, when we look at these things as proactive or reactive, it's something you don't really know that you need until you need it. So, the proactive is just a safe bet. It's the thing that you kind of lean on and go like, well, even if I don't know how it's going to manifest or why, being prepared is pretty good. This is not my wheelhouse. I'm not super knowledgeable in this side of things. So I'm going to only talk from my, level of experience personally, which has been more about, seeing these things as not so much an afterthought, but something that you know is there. You just kind of count on it to work, and when it doesn't, you kind of perk up and go like, "What? I thought that was going to be that way." And that can be, things that don't seem at first to be connected, like software, hardware, the cloud, infrastructure, all those types of things. That's where, specialists and people that are really competent in these areas really need to be involved, because the way that they interconnect with each other and the potential problems or risks associated with making the wrong call or not really giving yourself the appropriate backups or preventative measures if you're worried about kind of security. Those things kind of happen in ways that you wouldn't anticipate as a layman.
Well, I mean, you never know you have a problem until it happens. And ironically, the second portion of this podcast, we're going to bring in Jason Grilo, who is an IT expert, whether it be in the public or the private sector, whether it be at an agency level, in an organization, or helping people with setups, remote setups. And so we live in a day and age where either you're in a physical office space, you are remote, or a blend. And so the IT components of what are required are very unique nowadays. Things like, what are the business requirements that are solving business problems? Your tech stack is more than just security. Your tech stack is often stuff that is there to, CRMs is a really good example of what we talked about that a few weeks back. CRMs is a part of your tech stack, let alone, G Suite or, anything you're doing to actually get communication going. But when you're dealing with staff that are remote, it can bring up unique challenges. Phones, tablets, laptops that are no longer the company's. What are they doing on them? Are they using it for personal use? Do they have backdoor access to hackers? As cheesy as that sounds, these are all things that are really important to think about. Your processes, you're educating your staff on, risk mitigation. Fluffy Bunny 1234, believe it or not, is not a good password. And, even if you have, good solid, passwords and two-factor authentication and things like that, there is still risk associated. And it's something that I believe every organization should have a specialist in their back pocket, whether it be in-house or, like we do, we outsource our IT. And whenever we have an issue, they're on it. It's saved us more than once. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth to talk about the changes recently, obviously coming out of pandemics and all the things associated with that. We have, work cultures changes, we have work style changes. You've got the whole work from home or remote or hybrid, et cetera. No matter what side of that fence you're on, the reality is we're in a much more diverse landscape when it comes to the technical requirements. It used to be we had a very centralized ability to, if you operated or worked within an office, it could have its own server, it could have its own kind of network that needed to be just really locked down for that physical location. But now with a lot of the flexibility, even if you have a dominantly in-office culture, but you've got more travel now, or you've got more people zooming in or sharing files remotely because of all the dynamic work environments out there, you need to kind of think a little more broadly and, think about how cloud infrastructure impacts local infrastructure. And again, I'm kind of getting out of my depth here as for how that's done, but those types of considerations are a lot wider, that's for sure.
Well, I think it's important that, you set up an infrastructure that works for your business model. Just because it's working for one business doesn't mean you can carbon copy it, even if it's in your industry. I think every business exists because it has a unique place in the market, whether that be unique skill set, unique service offerings, a solution, or, pricing or whatever it might be. You have to make sure that your sales processes, your marketing processes, your data security processes, all these things that fall into the world of IT, again, IT is there because they're there to help make things more efficient. I think the best IT specialist is probably someone who's sitting around and not doing much because they've set up the structure perfectly and they've educated everybody accordingly. But Jordan, you're absolutely right. Creating, especially in the, just kind of going back here in my head, the remote model is a challenging one when it comes to IT. I know a lot of agencies that use Trello and use all these online softwares to be able to, streamline processes. Those things can be, for the most part, pretty safe, pretty secure. Living in an ecosystem where everyone's got MacBooks and things like that, where it's like it's unified across, helps things be a little bit more streamlined. But I keep coming back to it. You have to have a proper onboarding with your staff. You have to educate them on how things are done so that they can be adopted into the system that's already in place. And then more than anything, telling them what the game plan is if something were to happen. If you click on a phishing email, what happens? Are you going to get fired if you tell somebody? Like there should be a process in place. And maybe we'll kind of wrap up this part of the segment, with a crazy story. Because the story actually has Jason Grilo, who will be joining us here, who helped us. So years and years and years ago, we had an individual who left our organization. She had an old HP MacBook, an HP laptop. And what we did is we were actually wiping all of these old laptops, and we plugged one into the network. And before it was properly wiped, somebody actually got in through our network, hacked into the computer and got access to our network. And actually, it was a ransomware scenario where they actually started erasing all of the files and corrupting all the files in one of our drives. And, we don't work with terrorists. We don't negotiate with terrorists. But, we actually decided, we're going to sacrifice that drive. And Jason came in on his white horse and, with a sword and he got everything taken care of, bing, bang, boom, real quickly, and, saved our business. And it was something that, in my opinion, nobody in our office or our organization would have ever have thought that thing would have happened. And they got in because that individual, no idea what it was, but the password was very simple, ABCD1234 exclamation mark or something like that. And there's softwares that can crack these things. But, at the end of the day, process, policies, making sure your staff are in tune with that, and then making sure that you have a risk mitigation and a process when risk does occur, I think is essential. And I'm sure Jason is going to IT us to death for probably 20 minutes, and our heads are going to spin, but there's somebody out there that needs to hear it.
Exactly. And it's important that there are people like him that are more passionate about these things than we are, so that we can actually rely on them when these situations come up. But, yeah, I mean, you never know when these scenarios are going to crop up, and it's all about who you know sometimes and how they view the world in their own unique, skillful ways.
Well, why don't we throw it over to the interview that we're about to have with him here in about half an hour. I'm excited to talk with him.
Okay, and welcome back. We now have our guest with us today. So as we were talking earlier, we're going to be delving deep into the world of IT management. So we'll be welcoming Jason Grilo, who's IT managing professional, also IT consultant, working both in public and private sectors, mostly around subjects of systems, infrastructure, administration, risk mitigation, all sorts of those topics we'll be covering today. And currently working with a national health benefits company called Open Circle. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
You betcha.
Can peek over that little name card there.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Knocks you in the chin.
I like it. So smooth.
It is smooth. I made those animations, just so you know.
Nice.
So yeah, as Jordan was talking about, we talked earlier in the first couple segments all about IT, of which we know a bit about, but we're nowhere near at the tier of an IT specialist or consultant like yourself.
What are you talking about? We went into great detail. We even used words like cloud or infrastructure. Nice. Yeah.
G Suite. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
we are.
The more abbreviations you guys can use, the better. Like more acronyms thrown around is usually better.
Got to make it relatable for our audience.
Like HVAC.
Yeah. That's right.
That's.
I think that was your previous episode.
That was maybe it was. Well, why don't we kind of just start with a very high level topic, equipping your team, but more from less from a business management lens and more from an IT specialist lens, because I think a lot of the time, when we think of IT, we just think of problems, but an IT specialist comes in with a complete different lens. It's usually more from an engineer perspective, frankly, where you're looking at every little aspect and connecting everything. So, why don't I just throw it over to you? What are the high-level benefits of IT, training, risk, awareness, those types of things?
For
What's
sure.
on your mind?
Traditionally, you speak to anyone kind of in the industry, and most times the IT department of a company is looked at as a cost. They're a cost center, right? Every time the IT people come to the table, it's we need more money for this, we need more money for that. So it's tricky to kind of break down sometimes those walls and those barriers, and to look at IT as being strategic, right? Especially when it comes to some key decisions that organizations face, right? You look at something like COVID as a quick example, right? That caught a lot of companies, flat-footed, because right away it was bang, this thing has occurred, it's out of our control. Guess what? You're really dependent on IT and for whatever systems to be able to be, managed or controlled from home or work from home, all that stuff, right? So yeah, it's an interesting world. Certainly most times on paper, IT can cost, it's just all costs. Nowadays, I think we're finally starting to change a bit of that conversation point, because we're starting to see, okay, the costs, now it's protecting our systems and our employees from, the hackers, the bad actors out there that are, all they want to do is, basically, get some ransoms out of companies, right? Find some weak entry points or weak systems or whatever the case. So
I don't know
IT is starting to be
that.
less. Yeah, why would you, right? IT is less of they're just asking for more in the budget to replace their computers. They work fine. What are you guys worried about, right? So.
Yeah, often, especially for small businesses, you can't often afford it. It's a 4 or 5 digit figure that comes with the topic of IT, and you just never think as a small business that you're at that tier yet, and usually have a salesperson on the other end trying to convince you, and you can't afford it. And then you have monster companies that just reinforce with everything under the sun. And I could just imagine being an IT specialist on that side is probably just a room full of wires.
Yeah, and unlike some other professional designations, I often use this example, accountants, right? To be an accountant, you have to have professional designation. You have to be investing in your education every year to maintain these designation levels. IT is this interesting beast because most things you can accomplish 30 different ways. There's the best practice, there's the recommendation, there is all these, this is the good way to do it, but technically this way works, and end users won't be much of the wiser, right? So it's tricky because you can have these used car salesmen, if you will, selling you this system or this technology or this type of IT company that's going to do X, Y, and Z for you, but it's hard to cut through it and actually know what's actually the truth, right?
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier, one of the consequences of COVID and the now remote work kind of scenarios that are coming up, or even hybrid, it really changed even just the way that you might look at things, I imagine, in the IT world, where it used to be more like you were building walls around an office, like a single point of weakness or a single point of strength, and connecting it to the world only where it needed to be. Now it's, you have all these different ways of interacting with everybody, and everybody's all over the place. And, it's a very broad, dynamic world, I imagine now.
Oh yeah, we, so I worked for an IT consulting company for years. And so we did IT for many different companies. And that was the most interesting position to be in when COVID hit, because here we are supporting, companies of 5 employees all the way up to 100 plus employees. And when COVID hit and everyone had to shut down, we had to disappear from our offices, it was really interesting to see how different companies reacted. there were some companies, yeah, we would spend thousands and thousands of dollars on infrastructure and firewalls, and basically, like Jordan said, hardening the physical office, right? Everything was controlled, everything was behind that firewall garden of whatever, it was safe. But then COVID hit, and that's like, now all of our employees go out there and work and do the same thing that you were going to do normally, sending and receiving and modifying files in all the same ways, but all the protections we put in place and you invested in are not as applicable anymore, right? So it was a really interesting position to be in, and to watch organizations go through it, some better than others, a lot of lessons learned. That's what makes it really interesting for me to be in this industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Jordan brings up a good point. For the most part, you go back a number of years ago, everybody was in a 4x4 box, and the IT specialist had control over every wire that went to every computer, and knew where every keyboard and mouse was because there was a sticker on the bottom of it. And then you're right, everyone's dispersed. So maybe providing some insight to people who aren't aware of that world, or maybe you're an agency owner and you're debating on going remote. It's a different business model, but it also is a complete different system from an IT perspective. How do you view that? How do you view that world? I mean, you have employees who have their own assets, company assets. If someone leaves the company, how do you manage it? I mean, I'll just throw all that at you. I mean, how does an IT specialist look at the remote world nowadays compared to how it used to be?
Well, and I think even that subject and topic has changed over the last 3-4 months, right? So most people have probably heard in the news right now, and maybe you haven't. So a company called LastPass, right? Large, huge company out of the States. And what they sell is they sell a piece of software that's called a password vault, right? It's a pretty important piece of technology, and we preach it to all companies that you should be using a password vault, right? So for those that don't know, the concept is very simple, is you have one super secure password that you use to unlock your vault. And inside of this vault, you have all your passwords to all your different websites that you use. You can put your credit card numbers in it. It's a vault. Everything in there needs to be as safe and secure as humanly possible. And you're trusting this company that you're paying for to protect that said vault. And they have, like the security around it is phenomenal. Except here is a scenario that's played right out right now, is that company probably has a fairly softer policy in terms of what systems can be accessed on what computers. So if I'm an employee, Bob, of this company, can I access company information on my personal computer? Well, organizations right now, you take a look at companies that, we'll do a BYOD, or bring your own device, right? Smaller companies especially, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe more marketing, agency type of companies, or those that are a little bit more flexible on the types of equipment that you use, right? So sure, no problem, Bob, you can use your own laptop. You'll log into the work-related systems, and we'll make sure that's all protected and safe. But you can use your laptop for whatever you like. And so you have this personal versus business on the same device, which is all good and gravy. But what happened in this particular instance, and what's changing right now, is, other things in this person's home network were not secured or protected or out of date. A vulnerability was discovered. Now, and real quick, the context of this story is we're talking a very specific attack. Someone knew who this person was and who he worked for and the type of information he had access to. So he installed a keylogger, so a keyboard logging piece of software. So every keystroke this person would type on his computer, logging into his Facebook account or his company data, would be logged into this piece of software and sent to the attacker. Well, that basically triggered a massive breach in LastPass. Now, not only did it affect them and their customers' data, but we're talking reputation. As a business, the reputation that they have now, if you Google LastPass, one of the first things you're going to see is all the news articles about how they were compromised, how they were breached, how they've known about it for 6+ months and didn't disclose it to the public. So stuff like that is, it's a really new, fresh story that I think is hitting people a lot more than ever before. It's because look how important it is for your employees when they're not within the four walls of this secure garden, what they even do on their personal computers, how it can affect the business side as well,
Yeah.
right? Getting that flexibility between convenience and security, right? It's always a balance act. It's like, do you make it so complicated and so secure that it's impossible to get work done? Or do you make it, convenient enough and efficient enough that you can, get your work done, but there's some risk, right? So I think right now that's really playing out, especially with this LastPass story.
So putting yourself kind of in that seat. I mean, obviously LastPass is a one-off scenario, but attacks do occur, and I think it's a valid thing that you're talking about. Brand reputation is something that when it's tarnished, it's very, very hard to scrub out. Like it's difficult. But I mean, how do you mitigate those types of things? Is it just proper training? Is it software based?
Yeah, I think like I always preach that the biggest starting point is your employees, right? Like at the end of the day, we're flawed human beings sitting in front of a computer programmed by flawed human beings, right? The safest computer is locked in a safe and disconnected from the internet, right? Like that's as safe as you can possibly get. So it all starts with the human aspect, right? I think this is where a lot of companies, you probably could use more help and could tighten up, right? It's understanding that not only every dollar you spend in training and empowering your employee on using their computer and technology like responsibly, not only helps you as a business, but helps them in their personal life as well. If we look around at our employees and say, whatever money we're spending on training them and onboarding them and being safe with technology, guess what? You're going to have less people being breached in their own personal life because it still bleeds into your business, right? If Sally gets her bank account compromised, yeah, it may not be your company data, but guess what? They're taking time off work. They got stuff going on. They got stresses in their life. That all bleeds into business, right? And into the work that they're doing. So I know at our company, we've always been good at investing in, training our employees, doing what we call security awareness training, which is, doing simulated phishing testing to our employees. So we will schedule random crafted emails, some look like Canada Post, some look like UPS, like we'll craft a whole bunch and we'll randomly spatter them across our staff in random intervals. And the concept behind it is to keep the idea front of mind for them to always be asking the question, is this legit? Should this be legit? Am I expecting this type of email? Should I be clicking this link? And then working an actual program behind it that when people click on a link, it's not about shaming or reprimanding them. It's about, further education. You're figuring out what's causing them to click on a link. Look, no matter what, even if you're well trained and you go through your training, if you're having a stressful day, all it takes is that one time, right? Like, hackers have to succeed once. We have to be successful all the other times at thwarting it, right? So, yeah, education's huge.
And that's something I think you learn not to put your hand on the oven, once, and then you kind of don't do it again. But unless somebody else has done that, they're going to do the same thing, in their own experience at some point. So, transferring that knowledge, those hard lessons, if they're hard lessons, I can see that being extremely valuable. I mean, as a person myself, I've, obviously learned either through direct experiences or had other people's, horror stories come up, breaches or ransomware situations at other companies that you hear about. You build up like a defensive toolkit for yourself of just like rules of thumb, even as laymen. Like I deliberately avoided the whole subject of anything, IT related. I can sort of understand what you're talking about, but it's not something I'm passionate about by any means.
Yeah.
So when I look at things, I go like, well, rule of thumb, try not to put all of my data in one place. I kind of disperse it in other secure areas. Do I have a copy of things that are really important? Do I have, if I do have an email that I'm not familiar with, am I checking that the URL even matches like with the thing that it claims to be coming from?
Totally.
But somebody else who doesn't have those experiences or haven't heard those stories, they're going to, have to unfortunately run into those the hard way sometimes.
Yeah, and think about it as business owners, right? You hire a new employee, you run through, the normal, things you do to interview an employee. Well, how do you get a sense on their, technology maturity, right? Like, yeah, maybe they don't need it for the job and the role that they're doing. But if they're using any sort of computer system with access to any sort of company data, guess what? They probably need to have some sort of baseline that you should know about, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, training and doing phishing training and stuff like that is one thing, but like even for us as a company is actually baking it into our onboarding is where we're starting to really tighten up right now, because it often gets forgot about. Oh, a new person starts, it doesn't matter what age they are. It's like we just let them go. Here's some access to a bunch of stuff. Have fun, and hopefully not to do bad things or not to go bad places on the internet or like you put all this trust in them as right. And then like on the other side is get this is like what happens if something does occur? What if Sally does click something and something does occur? What does she do? Well, if employees don't know what to do, they'll probably look at, did I do something bad? I better hide this, or I better not say anything, or maybe it wasn't anything, and then just kind of let it go. And oftentimes when there's a breach or something, they're in there for months undetected because that situation occurred, and now it's like we've moved on, right? So full circle education, right?
I find it fascinating that you put your team through like a simulation. And I won't lie, when you said, a simulation, I thought you maybe meant like a simulator. So like you have like an IT phishing simulator, like a flight simulator, and you put them in a room and there's screens around and they're, we're going to send you emails.
They've all got VR headsets and they're like, ooh, I just got an email.
Maybe that's the next business idea, right? Because you got to make it fun, right? IT shouldn't be gray on gray. It shouldn't be boring. There should be some excitement to it. Get people, more engaged into it. So, Chris, that's a great idea, right? Because, it doesn't need to be super boring or like blah, right? Why not have some fun with it?
You're saying IT shouldn't be so gray. Yet for those viewers watching on YouTube, you're wearing a gray shirt with a gray background right now. So
Exactly. I just wanted to show the people, it doesn't have to be like this.
Well, simulators, maybe is a very futuristic invention. And maybe that's a good way of kind of pivoting into, the future of IT or corporate IT.
Where's all this going?
Yeah. Like where's the future?
Yeah. Well, I think we've seen, certainly trend-wise, from my seat, we've seen the push to cloud everything, right? We've seen the service as a service. We've seen, you no longer need to own anything. You guys in the creative, ad agency space, think of Adobe, right? Wow.
Yep.
When is the last time you bought Adobe, right? Well, guess what? You'll never own it, but you'll pay for it forever. So we've seen lots of the trends. Everyone's pushing cloud. AWS, Google, it doesn't matter. And I think we've seen some situations where what happens when it goes down, right? Holy smokes, talk about like part of the internet just halting to a crawl. So I think trend-wise, like I know for companies like our size, so we're about 60 some employees, mostly in Edmonton and Calgary. We're seeing the trend, the cloud is great, but that sweet spot is that hybrid. Like not everything needs to be up there. Some things you should still maintain some control over. Really, right, what's hot right now and the trend going forward is just data security, right? Every organization, like the most valuable asset is data, right? That's what you have. I look at our company and I look at what is the data that we have, and if someone wanted to attack us, what are they looking for? What are they going to get, right? They're going to get data. That's what it all boils down to. So every system that you log into, anything to do with like what we call multi-factor authentication. So the concept of a password and a thing should be an automatic, you turn it on. Two-factor, multi-factor does different terms, but it's the same thing, right? Anything that can support it, you turn it on and you make sure it's on. That's not bulletproof, but it's darn close because you need to know my passwords and have my phone, right, to get into the systems. Large organizations can benefit from things which we call single sign-on or SSO, right? So a lot of the systems we use at our company, all the entry points to the different web-based tools are all with one singular username and password, which is then multi-factor authenticated or 2FA. So right there, you're protecting quite a bit. Now I think is because of this thing like LastPass and stuff, the conversation of, BYOD, bring your own device, and figuring out the balance there, I think that's going to go back on the table as we must actually talk about this again. I think some organizations are going to reevaluate, is it worth the convenience? Is it worth having it? Do we go back to a company supplied laptop that's only for company use? You do not use it for anything else, to keep it totally isolated from your personal world, right?
But how do you force that? Like, how do you manage that? I mean, if Sally, goes to India on holidays and is going to work remote for a month or something like, I mean, how do you control that she's only using it for work?
Yeah, for the systems that we use, like we can put, as IT, we can put policies on what devices are allowed to log in. So if it's a web-based system like Microsoft 365, right, which is all of our collaboration and email and stuff, I can lock it down and say an employee cannot be on a personal device, they cannot be outside of North America, and lock it down that way. Then the company has to supply the equipment. That means that if you want Sally to work in India or Brazil, and she wants to have her personal computer, she's probably bringing both, That's the extreme, but the conversation might have to be had again for some organizations, because you look at companies like LastPass and ultimately like that was part of it. So at what cost? What was it worth to allow that to happen? And the reputation is affected, people's data is affected, right?
Poor Sally, she's gonna have to pay for an extra carry-on.
Yeah, Sally seems like a bit much, but
Sally doesn't sound like
we'll worry about that'll come up in her next review, I'm sure. Yeah.
Totally right. It's we've opened Pandora's box, right? Like you can work from anywhere so that box is open. IT was, depending on your strength in IT and organizations, you were either like ahead of the curve, with the curve, or way behind the curve. And some organization that jumped ahead to satisfy, what employees wanted out of their work from home or work anywhere. Now they have to reevaluate, okay, where are our security and our, where is that now? Have we slid too far the other way, right?
So if we're talking about, these exciting pros and things that are existing, there has to be the opposite side of that. So is there like a fear associated on the other end of the spectrum? Like, is there a negative con? Is all of IT and, information technology held together with a string? What is the fear? What are the cons that
are we headed towards the heat death of the universe of IT? Or,
That's right.
Well, I think the biggest con we're seeing is when these massive cloud providers, you look at your big ones, Amazon Web Services, AWS, is huge. Most everything on the internet is running on AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. When some of those systems have blips or have issues, it really affects people. Like you look at, we use Zendesk for our ticketing system, and one day, or I think it was 2 days in a row, there was issues with AWS that was affecting our specific instance of Zendesk. We were completely helpless. We couldn't do anything because we were all of our eggs were in that basket, that cloud hosted basket. All we could do is sit back and wait, right?
Yeah, we had a few softwares that day that were down too on the marketing side, like AWS.
Yeah. And so what do you do, right? Like your business needs to keep running, but guess what? Your systems are down.
As we all know, the internet's just a series of tubes, right? So if one of those big tubes is blocked, then we've got some trouble. But
some of those tubes have light in them.
Like, was it Cloudflare went down a couple times in a row a couple of years back, and that controlled like something like 30% of websites for a period of time there, and they just disappeared from the internet for like better part of a couple days.
That's right.
Pretty
Or
significant.
look, what did we experience in Canada? What was it? The other month there, was it Rogers that went down, right?
Yeah.
Rogers or Bell? Like, talk about what happens when your life is hooked to the internet and you lose data for almost a day or two, right? Like, so that's the cons, right? With everything being so internet connected, most people don't realize that the internet is a bit of a dumpster fire. Like, it's incredible to think that I can talk to you on this video call and these packets of information are traveling all the way to you and back. Now, yes, we're both in Edmonton, but I could be across the world. Like, think about how incredible that technology is. But there's a lot of things that are flying back and forth on these pipes. So, yeah, it's it's
live,
really good when it works
so fast.
Yeah, so fast, right?
Well, I'll tell you what I've learned today is that to be good at IT, everything has to be an acronym. So, there's only so many letters in the alphabet, Jason. I mean, the problem that I see as a big con is that IT specialists are going to run out of letters. I think that's the real thing that's going to happen here.
Oh, never. We'll always find more letters. Or throw on like a version like 2.0 behind it, or 3 or something. Have you heard of Wi-Fi 6? Have you heard of Wi-Fi 7? Maybe there's Wi-Fi 8 coming around the corner. Who knows?
Revolutionizing Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. My brain is rattling. There's so much in the. I mean, we've been talking for 28 minutes. The reality is, I think we have scratched the surface in the world of IT. Every topic we could have done a week-long podcast series on. It's a very deep subject, and more than anything, it is something that I think people need to be taking a little bit more seriously, especially as your business models change.
Just invest in people and training those people. Invest in teaching them how to best use the tools and be safe. And you will reap the rewards. They will these employees will benefit in their personal life, and they'll benefit in the business life.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure we'll have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And hopefully there's more pros and cons here as we head into 2023 for you and everything you guys are doing there at Open Circle. It sounds like pretty great things you're doing. So,
thanks, guys. Thanks for having me again.
You betcha. Cheers.
Thanks.
Well, it was a really interesting podcast session that we had here today, Jordan, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. Are you numb?
Looking forward to more of that, but probably on another episode, maybe a few weeks from now.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Fortunately, we have a really large network of really intelligent people, and that's great because I can't know everything about every topic. So, well, it is that time to end the show. Thank you so much for all of our listeners who have joined us on what is already our 7th episode, I believe it is, not including the pilot. So that's crazy. We really do appreciate you. We do this because we want to throw knowledge out there and help people and educate people. So, we obviously are going to invite you to come back in 2 weeks when we do another episode.
Absolutely. Well, just wanted to also remind everybody to subscribe wherever they might be catching us on a podcatcher, or if you're on YouTube, that's a great place to like, subscribe, bells and dingles and all sorts of things. Anything that has up thumbs or up votes or shares and connections.
Yes, make sure you up thumb this.
Yeah, do all of the buttons that look like positive things. Do those things.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Enjoy. Cheers.